Hello, everybody. Good afternoon and good day to everyone. Our topic would be adolescence. So now we're done with prenatal development, first 3 years, early childhood, middle childhood, and then now we're down to the fifth stage, which is adolescence. After this, we're only left with emerging adulthood, middle adulthood, and late adulthood. So as we have been discussing, in the past few stages, we'll also look into physical development, cognitive development, and psychosocial development. We say that adolescence is a developmental transition because we don't know yet whether we're we're no longer considered as children, but we're also not yet considered as adults. So we're down in the middle of both. So we say that it's a developmental transition. Second, we also say that it is a social construction because not all countries, not all nations would say that there really is a stage called adolescence. So some would immediately jump from childhood into adulthood, and they don't have that transitional period we call as adolescence. And then there's the third aspect. We say that it's a time for opportunities and risks. We say that there are so many things that an adolescent can do. Physically, we say that you're um, relatively among people who are in the adolescent stage, they are more capable physically. But at the same time, because the brain, the frontal lobe of the brain is not yet fully developed, then there are also tendencies for risk-taking behaviors. And some of these risk-taking behaviors would have implications in their health or sometimes even in their functionality. So let's look at adolescence. Uh, we'll first talk about physical development, and most of the time, the word that's interchanged with the word adolescence is puberty. However, let's make that clear. Puberty is not adolescence, and adolescence is not purely puberty because puberty is only limited to the physical development. As you can see, puberty is the process by which a person attains sexual maturity and the ability to reproduce. So it only encompasses the physical development, but it doesn't include cognitive and psychosocial development. So let's look at puberty. Let's kind of review what puberty is all about. If you can still remember, there's what we call the HPA axis when we talk about stress and depression. HPA means hypothalamus pituitary gland and adrenal gland. So we know that that's the pathway that we go through, that our hormones go through whenever we're stressed or we're depressed. Let me just refresh you about this. No, so the first one is hypothalamus. It's in the hypothalamus where the gonadotropin releasing hormone is released, right? Excuse sorry, corticotropin releasing hormone is released. And then the corticotropin releasing hormone will now signal the pituitary gland to release the adenocorticotropic hormone, which will then signal the adrenal glands to produce your corticosterone or your corticosteroids. Um, that will be our source or our um, biochemical signal that we're already stressed. So your steroids in your body would tell whenever it's elevated, it can lead to depressive symptoms. So that's the reason why we say that whenever you're stressed, you that like prolonged stress that can lead to possible depression. In the same way that your increased corticosteroids, cortisol in your blood will also have an effect on your immune system. So, for example, if there's increased cortisol levels, then most likely you're going to catch colds or flu right away whenever you meet somebody or you get exposed to somebody who has colds. Because your immune system will be down whenever your cortisol levels are high. Another effect of your cortisol would be um, like our bones would be brittle. Remember, if you have cortisol levels that are high, your bones can get brittle. So that's also one of the effects of cortisol. It can we can go on the whole time discussing the effects of increased cortisol levels in our body, but our main focus today is the HPG. So after talking about HPA, there's also what we call the HPG axis, which focuses on the reproductive system. Okay, and this is what happens during puberty. So your hypothalamus releases your gonadotropin releasing hormone, which will then signal your pituitary gland to release your LH and FSH. So your LH is your luteinizing hormone, and your FSH is follicular stimulating hormone. These hormones will then signal your gonads or your um, reproductive organs to produce either sperm or ovum or ova. It will also produce what we call the reproductive hormones, which are androgens and estrogen, and then eventually progesterone, of course, which will be involved in pregnancy. We have some of the effects of androgen would be the development of the penis, pubic hair, testes. Also for females, so like for example, there are also armpit hair and acne. For females naman, there's the development of the breasts, ovaries, and uterus. Okay, so that's the HPG axis, hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and your gonads, the axis that is involved in puberty. Puberty also has two stages. The first one is called your adrenarche, and the second one is called your gonadarche. Let me explain one by one. Adrenarche happens early. So it starts at age 6 to 8 years old, where there's an increase in androgens and in dehydroepiandrosterone or your DHEA. Your DHEA reaches 10 times its level, the level of when we were 1 to 4 years old at the age of 10. Now, the DHEA or your dehydroepiandrosterone is responsible for pubic hair, axillary, and facial hair. So some people already start to have um, hair growths all over the body, maybe at the age of 8. Because we know, or maybe at the age of 10, because we know DHEA is already high at this stage. At the age of 10, that's when it goes 10 times higher. And then you proceed to gonadarche. In gonadarche, that's the time when the sex organs will start to mature and there's a second burst of the DHEA production. So your ovaries will now produce estrogen, which will then develop your female genitals, breasts, pubic, and underarm hair. And then the testes will now produce androgens or your testosterone, therefore developing your male genitals, muscle mass, and body hair. As you can see, just like what we said, in adrenarche, it already starts at around 6 to 8 years old. But the average age for puberty for girls is at 8 years old and 9 years old for boys. And the process is around 3 to 4 years. That's why when you start adrenarche at 8, probably you count 3 or 4 years, 9, 10, 11, that's when you have your menses, or sometimes 12, no, that's when you have your menses. So we don't say that we only become adolescents or we only enter the pubertal stage once we start menses or your menarche. No, it starts even prior to that. The adrenarche starts at around 6 to 8 years old. Let's continue. I think what are the primary sex characteristics? You may answer it on your own while you're there watching the video. But the primary sex characteristics involve the organs necessary for reproduction. So it doesn't involve the breasts, it doesn't involve other parts of the body like the skin, but it only includes for females, of course, ovaries, fallopian tube, uterus, clitoris, and vagina. So if you can still remember, the outer genitalia of a woman would involve labia majora, labia minora, then you have your clitoris, and then your urinary meatus, and then there's a vagina there. And then um, the last orifice there would be your anus. So if we go inside the vagina, it's um, vagina, and then we have cervix, and then cervix, uterus, fallopian tubes, and then we have your ovaries. For males, we have the testes, penis, scrotum, seminal vesicles, and the prostate. So those are the primary sex characteristics. How about the secondary sex characteristics? The secondary sex characteristics are signs of sexual maturation that do not directly involve sex organs. So all those that were not included as primary sex characteristics, this is where we classify them. No, for females, we have the breast, the skin, the pubic axillary, and the facial. So all sorts of hair are included as secondary sex characteristics. For males, we have broad shoulders, the voice that goes low, skin, pubic hair, axillary, and facial. Okay. One of the things that we also take note of during the pubertal stage is that there's an adolescent growth spurt na biglang tumatangkad. It's around 10 years old for girls and around 12 to 13 for boys. If you can see this, girls start early. So girls would be taller than boys during the first few years of puberty, and then eventually the boys will catch up at the age of 12 to 13. It lasts for around 2 years, and it's caused by your growth hormones and your sex hormones. So they interact. So the growth hormones interact with the sex hormones for us to grow taller. The growth spurt for girls lasts for around 2 years earlier than boys. No? And then the full height for girls is at 15 and the boys at 17. I frequently joke about this no, in class that our height at the moment is the maximum height that we'll have. No, there's no more way of stretching our bones or stretching our extremities. This is really the maximum height. Now, once you reach 15 years old for girls and 17 for boys, that's a maximum height you can ever have. Okay? Okay, let's continue. So what are the signs of sexual maturity? At 13 years old, uh that's the average age for spermarchy. Spermarchy is your counterpart, is the male counterpart for menarche. For us females, ours is menarche. That's when we start our menses at around 10 to 16 and a half years old. However, average age for boys for spermarchy is at 13 years old. You may not have your menses, but you also have a sign for sexual maturity, and that is your first time to have a wet dream. So the wet dream is also called nocturnal emission, and that signals your spermarchy or that males already are sexually mature. What is now the secular trend? So the secular trend is observing generations regarding attainment of adult height and sexual maturity. If you notice, maybe the menarche of our grandparents were earlier during their days, and then for us now it becomes later and later. So what are the things that affect, or sometimes too it becomes earlier, no? What are the things that affect the changes in the secular trend? Number one is that there's a higher standard of living. Number two is undernutrition, which is common for us here in the Philippines. No, usually, in terms of adult height, so if there's a higher standard of living, then most likely it will affect your nutrition and your food intake, and that will also affect the height, adult height, and even sexual maturity. Undernutrition too is consideration. So we know that if a person is undernourished or even malnourished, which is common here in the Philippines, then it will delay the menarche. Medyo magde-delay siya, as well as the adult height. We cannot reach the maximum adult height if there's not enough food intake. Third naman is leptin. So it can go both extremes. So your leptin protects us from losing weight. So for example, a person is overweight, that can also have an effect. No? Females who are overweight can can start menses early. However, it's the exact opposite for boys. If they are overweight, then they can, get delayed spermatory. And then we have endocrine disrupting chemicals. If, for example, yung mga inject sa chicken that we eat, they also say that that has an effect on our sexual maturity. And of course, we also consider genetics. Now, if it runs in the family that we have menarche as early as around 10, 11 years old, then that would most probably be what's going to be anticipated for you. However, if late naman kayo sa pamilya, then most likely late ka rin magkakaroon ng menses. No? So that's how we study the secular trend. I think I've discussed this in middle childhood, the brain and how we have the gray matter and the white matter. No? We said that the gray matter is important to be less dense as we grow older because the gray matter are prone are neuronal neuronal axons. So we know that if the axons need to get pruned, and otherwise, what will happen is that there will be unnecessary movements, unnecessary behaviors because the axons are connected all over. No, and it's not tailor fit, or it's not just concentrated on specific parts of the body that we need axon terminals on it, connected to it. So we say that when we tune neuronal axons, then we know that the behavior becomes more precise, and the behaviors and movements also become, more precise, and it's only focused on what's important. Okay. And then we also see that the white matter also is involved in the brain maturity during this stage. No? We say that your white matter are your glial cells, and the glial cells are important in myelination and in transmission of messages. So the more glial cells, the better. So just to review, we're expecting less dense gray matter and more white matter. As you can see in this figure, the blue parts are the ones with mature or more less dense gray matter. So if you can see, wala pa masyadong blue areas when you're 5 years old. And then when you grow older, there will be more blue areas, which signals less gray matter. So it tells us that as we grow older, when we become 20 years old, probably our gray matter becomes lesser and lesser dense, so that we know that our axons have been pruned. Only those that are important are kept. In terms of physical and mental health, relatively during the adolescent stage, we're physically healthy. But unlike in middle childhood where we prefer activities, sports, no, when we reach adolescence, the adolescent stage, it becomes less vigorous for us. There are also times when we have sleep problems. No, most of the time sleep problems are there because of gadgets, or sometimes stress at school, or even familiar distress. Also, what's common are eating disorders like anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and binge eating disorder. Just very briefly, let me differentiate anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and binge eating disorder, as well as atypical anorexia nervosa. So anorexia nervosa has two types. Number one is anorexia nervosa restricting type. The second one is anorexia nervosa binge eating purging type. There's another feeding and eating disorder we call as avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, which is common for children, but it mimics anorexia nervosa, the restricting type. However, what's the difference between the two is that in avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, the child just doesn't want to eat. No? That's why we would have to do total parenteral nutrition, or sometimes PEG. So the food is brought into the stomach directly through a tube. So that's what we do. if kids really don't want to eat and we cannot force them to eat. Children, adolescents naman with anorexia nervosa restricting type also don't want to take in food, but the difference between them is that those with anorexia nervosa restricting type don't want to eat food because of their misconceptions about their body weight and body image. So when they look at the mirror, they see themselves as fat or chubby. However, in reality, their bodies are already skin and bones. So anorexia nervosa restricting type is different from avoidant restrictive food intake disorder in the way they perceive themselves. The second type of anorexia nervosa is called the binge eating purging type. Bulimia nervosa, let me tell you, was once called the binge purge disorder, which means that bulimia nervosa also has the two symptoms of binge eating and purging that is also present in anorexia nervosa binge eating purging type. So what's the difference between the two? We know that the difference would be that in bulimia nervosa, they would be able to maintain a normal weight. So even if they binge eat and they purge, their weight is still normal. Compared to anorexia nervosa, binge eating purging type, their weight is really below, below the normal weight. So we compute for the body mass index, and when it's below the normal weight, then we say that it is anorexia nervosa. But if your client presents with binge eating purging, however the weight is normal, then we give a diagnosis of bulimia nervosa. We also have to differentiate bulimia nervosa with binge eating disorder, where we drop the purging behaviors and what's kept is just the binge eating. Let me just clarify, when we say binge eating, it has to be eating more than a normal person would within 2 hours. So does that mean that we sit and then we eat for 2 hours more than a normal person would? No, no, it's not just in one sitting. It can be that you eat right now more than a normal person would, and you take a rest, and then within the span of 2 hours, you have repeated eating, um, more than a normal person would. So it has to be within the span of 2 hours, then we can consider it as binge eating disorder. However, there's another disorder, so let me confuse you all the more. There's what we call atypical anorexia nervosa. Now, in atypical anorexia nervosa, the person has um, the person has binge and purge behaviors or restricting behaviors, and then they maintain normal weight. So what will now be the difference between bulimia nervosa and atypical anorexia nervosa? So the difference between the two is that even if in atypical anorexia nervosa, you will see that their weight is normal, you look at the laboratory most of the time, it's really below what's normal, and it looks like the person is undernourished or malnourished based on their laboratory results. Say, for example, let me tell you, there might be very low potassium levels, which is hypokalemia, or sometimes too, there's hyponatremia or very low sodium levels. Sometimes too, the person can experience amenorrhea or cessation of menses, or sometimes too, there can be arrhythmias or problems with the heart for these people. So as you can see, even if their weight is normal, their laboratory results will say otherwise. Why would that happen? Most of the time, because they start off being overweight or obese, and then they start binging and purging or restricting themselves with food, and then they reach to a point, so from obese or overweight, pagbagsak ng weight nila, they just retain the normal weight and not the underweight. But if you look at the labs would tell you that they are undernourished or malnourished. Okay? The substance use also that's common for adolescents would be marijuana, alcohol, and tobacco. And of course, depression is, all throughout the lifespan, it can also happen. What are the usual deaths for adolescents? There are motor vehicle accidents, firearm use, and even suicide. Now let's proceed to the cognitive development. Piaget stages of cognitive development only include four, and it stops during the adolescent stage, which is the formal operational period. So after adolescence, there's no more talking about Piaget anymore. We'll talk about neo-Piagetian approaches to cognitive development. Okay. So this is called the formal operation stage, where It's the final stage of Piaget's cognitive development, and it's characterized by the ability to think abstractly. So the child or the adolescent learns how to use symbols. So when do we start studying algebra? Diba? Usually that's for us, it's first year high school, but for some of you, it might be grade grade 11, no? Grade 11. Because at that time, you're already 11 years old, no? Something like that, or 12 years old, and you're already in the formal operation stage. During this time, you can think about and you can understand what X for the unknown means. Like, for example, I tell you, um, 2x, 2x plus 5 is equal to 7. So if it's 2x plus 5 is equal to 7, then you would know that x would be, or x stands for 1, because 2 times 1 is 2 plus 5 is equal to 7. So you would know what the x means. Then you would understand what it symbolizes for. And then we have understanding metaphor and allegory. During this time, an adolescent will be able to understand what the phrase life is never a bed of roses. No? What do you mean by life is never a bed of roses? It would mean that life is not easy. Life can have challenges, no, something like that. However, for kids, like for example, you tell a middle child or an early child that life is never a bed of roses, they would imagine, no, that there's a bed and there are plenty of roses on it, because they see statements as very literal. And also allegories. Allegories are stories that have deeper meaning, deeper meaning. For example, the hare and the tortoise. And for us, we call it ang, ang kuneho at ang kuneho at ang pagong, diba? And we know that story where they go for a race, the hare and the tortoise go for a race, and then the hare sees that he has gone past the tortoise and decides to rest, and then the tortoise continues with the journey and then reaches the finish line faster than the hare. And then we ask, what's the meaning behind this? For us, we know that it's about hard work, determination, that never tayong makakampante, no? There's a meaning behind that. But for kids, if they read stories like this, they won't immediately understand what the meaning behind the allegory is. But if you're already an adolescent, then it's expected that you understand. Also, during the formal operation stage, we understand the words might be and not just what is. So it's not so we're not so boxed anymore, because we know what that there can be other options, other results, from possible results from what has from what we have, you know for a certain experience, there can be plenty of other options, and there can be plenty of other results. Okay, now we proceed to hypothetical deductive reasoning. If you can still remember, when you were in first year high school, or probably grade 11, you've started to do science experiments, because at this time we are already capable of hypothetical deductive reasoning, where we develop, consider, and we test hypotheses. Let me just show you a pendulum on your right side. The pendulum that we're seeing, if there's a kid in early childhood, and a kid in middle childhood, and then an adolescent. Then we ask all these children, what do you think would make the pendulum move faster from left until right? If it's a kid, most likely the kid would just play around, and then they would not be able to test uh, their hypothesis, and they would even probably make any hypothesis. A child in the middle childhood would probably know that the weight of the circles would probably have an effect on the way the pendulum moves, or sometimes the length too, or the pressure in pushing the pendulum. However, they won't be able to, you know, test it systematically. They would most likely test the length, the weight, and the push all together. However, an adolescent will try it out one by one. Like, for example, the adolescent will start with changing the lengths and then seeing if it goes fast. Or, and then proceeding, he would try to change the weight of the circles and then let it, and then test it, and then change the pressure in pushing. Yes. And then the adolescent will now be able to answer the question, what really affects the movement of the pendulum? So it becomes systematic for an adolescent. What are the immature aspects of the adolescent thought? Number one, they usually have, we all had an imaginary audience thinking that people look at us and that people are, that we get other people's attention all the time. So that we become loud, or sometimes we enter a room, um, making it a goal that people would look at. So there's a characteristic like that for adolescents. And then you have the personal fable. Have you ever heard or have you ever uttered the statement na hindi mo nararamdaman yung nararamdaman ko kasi ako lang nakakaramdam ko. So that's the personal fable, that people don't understand you because you're the only one undergoing what you're going through. And then we have idealistic and critical of others. And most of the time, we're critical of people who are in authority, like our parents, our teachers. So, and yeah, which brings us to number 4, where we usually find fault in adults and authority figures. About language development, we are already proficient in the use of language. Around 16 to 18 years old, we already know 80,000 words, and we already have the capacity for social perspective taking. Like, for example, we don't immediately ask the age of a woman because we know that that specific woman can get offended. Or sometimes we don't make comments like, tumaba ka, o parang nag-gain ka ng weight. We don't make comments like that because we know that it can offend other people. We have learned how to, take into consideration what another person would feel. So that's what we call social perspective taking. And then we also use our own unique terms and specialized vocabulary. Like I give this an example. Like one of the girls who are close to me would use the word slay, and the first time that I heard that, I wondered what it meant, because there's a generation gap. We don't use the word slay. We didn't use the word slay during our time. What we had was jopoys, no, yung mga ganun, the P words and the this types of speaking. No, but we didn't have yung mga sling, we didn't have those kinds of words. So it depends sa generation, and then it might change. Okay. Excuse me, let me just pause for a. Okay, let's now resume. Now let's talk about the Heinz dilemma. So the Heinz dilemma is one of the tools that we use for determining person's moral development. Okay, so let me read the Heinz dilemma. A woman is near death from cancer. A druggist has discovered a drug that doctors believe might save her. The druggist is charging $2,000 for a small dose, 10 times what the drug costs him to make. The sick woman's husband, Heinz, borrows from everyone he knows, but he can scrape together only $1,000. He begs the druggist to sell him the drug for $1,000 or let him pay the rest later. The druggist refuses, saying, I discovered the drug and I'm going to make money from it. Heinz, desperate, breaks into the man's store and steals the drug. Should Heinz have done that? Why or why? Now let's ask ourselves that question. Would you believe that Heinz should have stolen the drug, or should Heinz just allow his wife die a natural death? So the Heinz dilemma is just one of the famous examples of Lawrence Kohlberg in the way he studied moral development. So that's the next slide that we're going to look at. So this is Kohlberg's 6 stages of moral development. And they say there are three stages. We have level 1, the pre-conventional morality, and then we have conventional morality and the post-conventional morality. And they say not all people reach level 3 or the post-conventional morality. Let's discuss that one. So let's now differentiate each of the stages. So each level has 2 stages. So for level 1, we have the pre-conventional morality. For pre-conventional morality, there are two stages. The first one is orientation toward punishment and obedience. So the main basis for for what is right and what's wrong is just the avoidance of punishment. So because we don't want to be punished, then we do what is right. Second, or we avoid doing what's wrong. Second is instrumental purpose and exchange. So we get what we want by trade off. So whatever I do to you, you also do to me. That's our basis of morality. For the second level, we have two stages, two, stage 3 and stage 4. For stage 3, that's maintaining mutual relationships and approval of others and the golden rule. So we say, but the golden rule will tell us, do not do unto others what you don't want others to do unto you. So am I a good boy or a good girl? It will depend on mutual relation. So um what this person does to me, I also do to the other person. So it's the basis of morality. For stage 4, it's more of social concern and conscience. So thinking what if everybody does this, what will happen to us, to the society? No. So one of the things that we uphold here are the laws. So we respect higher authority so that we maintain social order. uh, for level 3, no, not all people reach level 3 where we have two stages, two, stage 5 and stage 6. For stage 5, there's morality of contract or individual rights and democratically accepted law. So at this time, this is usually during the early adolescence or until young adulthood or even never. Now, at this time, stage 5, there's a sense of democracy and relativity of rules. So it doesn't apply to everyone, you know. Um, it only applies to a certain group of people. Like, for example, we have expectations of those who are well off. And because they have everything for them, then we don't expect the same for people who are in the low socioeconomic status where parang isang kahig at isang tuka lang sila. So it's to understand it more when people would have to, do drastic things for the sake of living, and surviving. Like, for example, in the case of Heinz, you would most likely say it's okay because it's what's right and what's wrong is already relative. Given the context of Heinz, we would most likely consider him stealing the drug because it was not, I don't know, he was already, I don't know, pushed against the wall and he cannot do anything about his wife's condition. Ganyan. And then we have stage 6 where there's a morality of universal ethical principles, where people do what they as individuals think is right, regardless of legal restrictions and opinions of others. Let me ask you a question. Like in the Philippines, abortion is prohibited. But if you go to the other country, um, you can have an abortion. So for example, you have the opportunity when you went to the US and you didn't want to have a baby, the baby that you're carrying, then you would really go for abortion even if there's no law governing or prohibiting you from doing so? Or for example, would in the Philippines marijuana and drugs are prohibited. But if you go in other countries, then they would tell you na okay lang. So what will be your conviction about that? So at this stage, all of us would have supposed to be would have um would now follow laws, and we would now follow our convictions and not just the laws that govern. So that's level 1, pre-conventional, level 2, conventional, and level 3, post-conventional morality. Now we proceed to Carol Gilligan's ethic of care. Si Carol Gilligan said that um, that the concepts of Kohlberg is only applicable to males, but has not considered what's really happening to females. Because for females now, our basis of concern is not just justice. Kasi sa males daw, their basis of morality is justice. But for females, our basis for morality is empathy and pro-social behaviors. So his levels do not apply to us females. That's according to Carol Gilligan. So she said that pro-social behavior increases from childhood to adolescence And that should be the basis of saying that someone is doing what's morally right. And then parents usher the development of pro-social behavior, and girls show more empathic concern and pro-social behavior compared to boys. Our peers also influence the development of pro-social behaviors. Like, let me give you an example. My sister and I are just 13 months apart. So and we were classmates for 4 years in high school. So she's basically my peer, the person I really grew up with. My sister in her car has plenty of biscuits, and she also collects mga coins dun sa parang ano niya, sa car niya. So that whenever she passes by people who are asking for food or asking for money, she has something to give. I, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. And so I would usually just wave my hand whenever there are people who knock on your window and ask for something. No? But I also learned from her. So sa ngayon, sa sasakyan namin, may coins na rin kami. No? Because our peers influence our pro-social behavior. How about educational and vocational issues? So at this time, we have self-efficacy beliefs. So children or adolescents who continue with their education and even vocation, one of the considerations would be self-efficacy. Kaya ko ba talaga mag-aral pa? Kasi kung hindi ko naman talaga kaya, then I wouldn't pursue further studies. Then second, parental practices. So if your parents are lawyers or your parents are teachers, no, you are more likely, or doctors probably, or office people, you're more likely to go the same path. But if your parents did not study, they did not pursue studies, then you wouldn't be as motivated daw. Yan ay sabi. And then third would be cultural and peer influences. Like for example, in the US, okay na sila when they finish high school, they're okay because they can land good jobs. But for us in the Philippines, no, we know that we cannot continue with we cannot have good paying jobs unless we study, we do further studies. And also peer influences, as well as gender, we know that females are more likely to pursue education compared to males, as well as the quality of schooling. So if you, like for example, if in your high school, junior high school, talagang ano no, na natutukan ka sa pag-aaral mo, maganda ang pinag-aralan mo paaralan, then you're more likely to continue and pursue your studies. Okay, we'll now proceed to the psychosocial development. In the psychosocial development, there's the search for identity. According to Erickson, it's a coherent conception of the self made up of your goals, values, beliefs to which a person is solidly committed. Most of the time, we think of identity as just sexual identity, gender identity, but we know here that for Erickson, he did not particularly say that it was our gender preference, but instead, he says that it is a coherent conception of ourselves, made up of our goals, our values, and our beliefs. So maybe ask yourself now, what are the psychosocial crises during adolescence? So we have identity versus identity confusion as the crisis that happens during this time. No, at this time, we know that this is Erickson's fifth stage of psychosocial development, where an adolescent will try to seek for who or she really is. So that includes their roles in the society. Sino ba talaga sila? So that's the time that we encounter this crisis. And we say that if we have reached, or we have, kumbaga parang we've settled this stage of development and even this crisis, we reach a point of fidelity. Fidelity is loyalty, sustained loyalty, faith, or sense of belonging that results from the successful resolution of identity versus identity confusion. So at this time, remember that this is the adolescent stage, and your goal is to reach fidelity or to develop fidelity. And if you're already faithful to yourself, fidelity is also faithfulness. If you're faithful to yourself, then you're able to move forward to the next stage, which is the young adulthood stage, where we're expected to be faithful to another person. Kasi that's intimacy versus isolation naman. That's the crisis. No? So very beautiful na pagkakagawa ng theory ni Erickson, because he sees how one stage builds up so that another stage can, ano ba yan? can develop. Okay. James Marshall also talks about identity status, where a person can only develop their identity by going through a crisis and then eventually being committed. So, crisis is a period of conscious decision making that's related to identity formation. So, um, if you're if you go through all the opportunities, and consider them one by one, that's the crisis. And then when you have already decided which ones to choose, and then you become invested on it, may it be a system of beliefs or occupation, then that's what you call commitment. So let's look at the different identity status. Number one, there's identity achievement, which tells us that we have went through a crisis, so you have considered all options, and then you become committed to it. So you have considered all alternatives. For example, when you went to college, what did you do? Did you look for, did you try to consider plenty of courses, and then you have eventually decided which course to take? If you did, that's identity achievement. Second, there's identity foreclosure, where a person who has not spent time considering alternatives is committed to other people's plans. So there's no crisis, but you're committed. And usually this happens when an adolescent is really obedient, plus there's a very assertive and strong person in the family that influences their decisions. Like, let me give you an example. Um, I'm not saying that I'm obedient, no, but I would say that there's a point in my life where I went through an identity foreclosure. When I graduated in high school, I was told I really wanted to take up mass communication. However, um, there's a company who told my parents that they're willing to send me to school. They'll shoulder my tuition fee as long as I took nursing, BS nursing. So what I did, because I didn't want to consider anything, consider other choices anymore, then I pushed through with taking up nursing and finishing the degree and passing the boards. So that's identity foreclosure. I did not consider alternatives anymore. Even if at a young age I really wanted to do journalism or mass communication, I didn't consider it anymore. I just proceeded with and obeyed what my parents told me to take up BS nursing, because there was this one person who wanted to shoulder my academic expenses. And then we have identity moratorium, where a person is currently considering alternatives. They are in a crisis at the moment, and they seem to be headed toward commitment, but not yet. No, they're not yet there, but they're getting there. So, for example, um, what uh, what specialization in psychology do you want to pursue? Or is it more of educational psych, IO psych, or clinical psych, or counseling psych? So if we haven't decided yet, but you're considering your options, then that's a manifestation that you are in an identity moratorium. Okay? And then we have identity diffusion, where there's absence of commitment and there's also lack of serious consideration of alternatives. So wala nang crisis, wala pang commitment. Okay? So again, identity achievement, you went through a crisis and then you are now committed. Identity foreclosure, there's no crisis, but you're very much committed. Identity moratorium, um, where you are currently in a crisis, but you're not yet committed, but you're getting there. And you have identity diffusion, where there's no crisis and there's no commitment. So let me now ask you a question. Jaden has not seriously considered options and has avoided commitments. He is unsure of himself and tends to be uncooperative. His parents say it's up to him. He figures he can get some sort of a job and make up his mind about the future when he is ready. He is unhappy and often lonely. Supposed to be there are questions, so it's okay. Let's just look at the options and then you can answer on your own. What identity status is he currently in? Is this identity achievement, identity foreclosure, identity moratorium, or identity diffusion? Okay, so this is identity diffusion. So walang crisis, wala ding commitment. Let's look at another question. Isabella has made commitments not as a result of exploring choices, but by accepting someone else's plans for her life. She has not considered whether she believes in her commitments and has uncritically accepted others' opinions. She is happy and self assured, but she becomes dogmatic when her opinions are questioned. She has close family ties, is obedient, and tends to follow a powerful leader, like her mother who accepts no disagreement. Let's look at the choices. So again, no, the choices would be um, so what's the identity status is she currently in? Is this identity achievement, identity foreclosure, identity moratorium, or identity diffusion? You have 5 seconds. Okay, so this one is identity foreclosure because the client did not go through a crisis but is committed. Now let's proceed to ethnic identity development. So it can be that it's not only applied in our personal lives, but also in our ethnic identity. Like for example, um, someone who is diffused in terms of ethnic identity can say, well, yeah, my parents are both Latinos, so I guess I probably am too. So there's no crisis, and then it seems like the client is not committed, so not so committed. Then we have foreclosure. I am really happy that I am Chinese. My parents have always made me go to Chinese classes and participate in Chinese cultural events. So that's just how I've always been. This one, the person has embraced being a Chinese because the parents have raised him to be a Chinese. Then you have moratorium. I've heard people say that racism doesn't exist anymore, but I disagree. Had some experiences that have really made me stop and think. I haven't figured it out yet, but I know that being black is different than being white. So the client is still in a crisis, but will eventually reach commitment. Then we have achieved identity achievement, where my parents are first generation immigrants and I was born here. When I think about myself, I think that I am a mix of their culture and of American culture too. I think it helps me be flexible in social situations, and I know that people are different in many ways, but also the same in many ways. Okay. Now we'll talk about sexuality. Now, during this time also, we build up on our sexual orientation. And we know that it's affected by biological, genetic, and environmental factors. No? So we know that there are specific parts of our brain, like your sexually dimorphic nucleus of your hypothalamus, or there's also um, other parts of our brains that make us more male or make us more female. Another concern during this time, our sexual orientation could also be affected by environmental factors, by how we were raised or the peers that we have that we grew up with. So those are also things that can affect our sexual orientation. We also have teenage pregnancy that is pretty much a heavy concern for in terms of sexuality in adolescents, plus sexually transmitted infections. Because, like we said, during in the first few slides, I said that this is a stage where there are more opportunities but also more risks because the frontal lobe of the brain is not yet fully developed. So most of the time, we do risk taking behaviors or risky behaviors because we cannot consider beyond the present moment. So the consequences we do not consider, so that we make wrong decisions at this stage. So let me ask, what is an aspect in your life that you don't want your parents to monitor? While you're thinking about it, let me just show you. These are the items used to assess perceived areas of parental versus adolescent authority. So it can be moral items like what is right and what is wrong. Most of the time, no, our perspectives are different from that of our parents. So lying to our parents, breaking a promise to parents, stealing money, hitting siblings. So those are just some of the things that we consider as right and wrong, no? And sometimes it becomes a source of conflict for the family. Second, we have conventional items, so like not doing assigned chores, talking back to parents, using bad manners, or even cursing. Prudential items are those that involve our health, like for example, smoking cigarettes, drinking beer, doing drugs, or having sex. There are also multifaceted items like not cleaning the bedroom, getting ears pierced with multiple holes, staying out late, watching cable or TV. But also there are multifaceted friendships, like when will we start dating, staying overnight in a friend's house, or seeing friends that our parents don't like, something like that. And we have personal items like sleeping late on weekends, choosing how to spend your allowance, choosing your clothes, and even your choice for music. So there are different items that become conflict between parents and adolescent children. In terms of relationships, we have relationships with parents. They say that um, the the conflict between parents and children that we believe to be very much true during the adolescent stage is just a myth. They say that not all adolescents really have conflicts with their parents. There are some who grew up and has surpassed the adolescent stage, but they still have very good relationships with their parents. If you can still remember, I told you of a cousin who um, whom I expected to be able to catch a ball even at a young age. And then kumbaga, I was rebuked ba and told na ganyan ba talaga, is that this child's brain developed na ang fine motor skills niya and gross motor skills niya kaya na talagang catch ng ball. No? Alala niyo yung story ko about that. That was the same cousin who will not eat candy even if wala ang mama niya. If andyan ang mama o wala ang mama, ino-obey niya pa rin ang mama. The same cousin is the one na hindi makakip ng secret. Nabuho kami ng tricycad at nahulog siya sa bike. No? It's the same cousin who told me na who disclosed the secret ba na na nahulog siya sa bike because she cannot keep alive. So itong cousin ko na to, also, now that she's already an adolescent, she can tell her parents, alam nyo, hindi kayo magkaintindihan kasi hindi nyo pinakikinggan ng isa't isa. O kaya naman, alam mo mami, nasasaktan mo talaga ako sa sinasabi mo. She can be expressive in that way, but at the same time respectful. So tama nga siguro that yung conflict between parents and children during the adolescent stage is really a myth. And then we have siblings, no? Most of the time, our relationships with our siblings are distant, a little bit distant during the adolescent stage. We rekindle our relationships with them during maybe towards the late emerging adulthood and then middle adulthood, maybe that time. We also have our peers, which are very important to us at this stage. No? They're more important than family. Then we have romantic relationships. Some people start young, no, even during the adolescent stage. But intimacy versus isolation, is a conflict that's supposed to be in the emergent adulthood stage. And then we have antisocial behavior and juvenile delinquency, which are concerns during this stage. That ends our topic on the adolescent.